Hey guys, it's your girl Eda. Aside from being the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast host, I am a legal consultant, author, and advocate for change within the legal industry. Every episode, we dive deep into the tools, strategies, and real world insights you need to succeed, featuring inspiring guests and topics that matter most to the modern legal profession. So, if you find value in these conversations, be sure to subscribe to the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast and download our episodes for your commute, coffee break, or brainstorming session. And if you know someone who could benefit, don't forget to send them our way. Referrals are always welcome. Let's create a stronger, more empowered legal industry together. In this episode, I get to speak with Patrick Barnes, attorney and expert in exploring the intricate psychological dynamics at play within law firms, client relationships, and team collaboration. We dive deep into the psychology that shapes the legal industry, from understanding how lawyers think and make decisions under pressure to uncovering what drives client behavior and how teams can foster healthier, more productive environments. This episode is packed with insights that will transform the way you approach the legal industry. If you've ever wondered how psychology impacts your daily interactions and the outcomes of your cases, you won't want to miss this conversation. Listen in for more. Welcome to the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast. I'm your host, Eda Rosa, and today I have Pat with me with an amazing topic for me, especially. I am going to be writing so many notes probably because, as you all know, I'm in the middle of a book and hopefully it gets launched next year, but it's totally about this and what we're going to talk about and the psychology behind everything that happens in the legal industry and how that affects us personally as the legal professionals working and supporting our communities. But without further ado, I gave you a little bit, but let's talk to Pat directly and learn more about him as the person. And of course, we'll get into the topic as we always do. So Pat, without further ado, introduce yourself to the audience and let us know who you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Patrick Barnes. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing since 2012. I started my career in Colorado, practiced out there for around 7 years, and then moved home to Florida with my family. So I'm currently just in North Tampa, and I work at a law firm called Hale Law, and we cover the Gulf Coast area. They're based out of Sarasota. So I've been doing personal injury basically my whole career. I've done workers' comp. I've done car accidents, slip and falls, medical malpractice, nursing home abuse, you name it, any kind of personal injury is what I've done. I've also done some estate planning as well. So that's what I do on a daily basis. I love it. I love helping people and kind of trying to help solve problems that people truly did not pick for themselves, right? They come to me in situations where they would rather be literally anywhere else than my office because of what's gone on with them. But I like to help that. And one way I do that is through what we kind of call trauma-informed legal practice. And that is a really broad brush for a lot of different concepts. But I speak nationally and write on the topic. And it's become a real passion of mine, mostly because it's affected me personally, and it's kind of changed how I practice law, which I think has done nothing but improve my relationship with my clients, my relationship with my career, etc. But yeah, so just to talk about that, so I'd say probably 6 years into my career, I started getting really burnout. And I was ready to jump ship and get out and go do literally anything else. And I was sitting on the back porch with my dad, who is a PhD, and he has basically 40 plus years of experience with trauma. Um, he's a addiction specialist, a marriage family therapist. And trauma's kind of been that thing that ties everything together. And we started talking about, I'm looking to get out. I don't feel good doing what I'm doing. And he started saying, well, that sounds like compassion fatigue, which I had heard him say, because that's what he's done, but I never really put the pieces together. And we started saying like, okay, well, this is what nurses have happened to them. This is what doctors, firefighters, policemen, you name it, all these people that are in helping professions that involve a lot of trauma see, and this is how like the natural progression of symptoms happen. I said, well, that's lawyers, that's paralegals, that's judges, that's bailiffs, anyone in the legal profession. We all do it. So it's been a really interesting journey putting what has been essentially decades worth of research and work for other professions into one that I think needs it as much as any other one. It just hasn't really come to light until recently.
Yeah, I call that the background first responders, right? Because
Yes.
the doctors, the medical providers, they do the initiation, they do the medical care, but we do all the legalities, all the
Right.
background work, right? And so that's kind of like our like I guess sneak peek in the book. It's basically how I started off. And so it's really interesting that you're actually putting all the pieces together, right? And
Hmm.
compassion fatigue is it's actually the inspiration of the book. I had that one case. We all have that one case that triggers us in many ways. And for
Yep.
me, it was very close to home. It was about a little girl close to my daughter's age that suffered a very severe trauma while she was trying to have fun, and somebody's irresponsibility, ended up with a neurological issue. She had to relearn how to walk and talk and all the
Mhm.
things. And she was close to home too. It's where my husband grew up, and he knew exactly the area. And so it was a tough case. I still get watery eyed, and
Yeah,
I still
absolutely.
am, very close with the family. We text each other all the time. They, text me pictures of her improvement and everything that's been going on. And so that was really the day where I decided to talk about this, right? Because it was hitting me for a long time, especially as a paralegal. I worked primarily in personal injury. I also did real estate, foreclosure, which also is a very traumatic because you're like, you're listening to the other side because I worked for the banks. So they would call us in desperation and times of need. And unfortunately, we personally weren't able to help them because we were
Right.
trying to
You're
take
on
their
their
house
side.
away. So I created this resource, list, and I started saying, hey, I can't personally, this firm can't personally help you, but there are other free resources out there. And I started just creating this list and emailing it to them.
Mhm.
And obviously I got in trouble, right? But for me, it was more about trying to save their life versus save their home. And
Right.
so, it was, I it's funny because for us, foreclosure in general is a more transactional thing, but it's really not. Like at the end of the day, we're working with people, and we're
Hmm.
working with these it's not like they don't want to pay their bills. Most of them were going through some things. And so it was unfortunate that we as the legal professionals that were having to handle this, had to go through that as well. And
Right.
so, it was just a lot of things that I said, this is something worth promoting. This is something worth talking about. So
Yeah.
you actually just dropped into my lap. So this is really great. Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah,
Shout out to
absolutely.
our Carrie.
Yep.
She's the one that connected us. And so
Love Carrie.
shout out to her. Yeah, she's amazing. So let's,
So
let,
it's
yeah,
interesting
let's
to
go ahead.
me. So a lot of people think, oh, well, lawyers are the ones that take all the brunt of the trauma, right? And when I say trauma, what we're talking about is what you just said it, secondary trauma, right? You didn't experience the trauma. You didn't have the car wreck. You haven't experienced the domestic violence or the bankruptcy that someone's filing because they got ill and medical bills got out of control. And now they're here in your office. They are the ones that experience the primary trauma. But what the science shows and the research shows is that secondary trauma has the same effects as primary trauma, and that is the caregiver, right? Or caregiver, helping professional, first responder, the ones that are interacting with the trauma on a daily basis, maybe not directly, but through the eyes of the client or through photographs that they're looking at, right? Or accident reports, reading police reports that are sometimes very graphic. You're inundated with that material all the time. And so that secondary trauma is not the exact same, but it is very similar and has the same manifestations of symptoms as the primary trauma. And so we, not just lawyers, but who's really seeing that and talking to these clients every day? It's the frontline workers, it's the paralegals, it's the intake specialists and the secretaries. They're talking with these clients and trying to troubleshoot. And so they are as much, if not more affected than the lawyers are, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the secondary trauma. And so what's interesting with compassion fatigue is, and when we do our lectures, we have an infinity symbol. It's like a sideways eight. And the reason is because the we only have so much bandwidth of energy in our existence, right? We wake up in the morning, we have so much to give. And we've found that there's two sources of energy burn, which is operational stressors and organizational stressors. And this applies to the legal field very much so. So the operational is the stuff that you know that you're going to experience because we're in the profession that we're in. You know you're going to have traumatized clients. You know that you're going to see and talk about things that are really tough topics with a lot of emotion. That's the operational. You know you're doing it because that's what we do for a living.
Right.
The other side is the organizational stress, and that's what you interact with in your office, right? And that's turnover, that's conflicts within the office, that's an inundation with voicemails and emails and feeling like you can't catch up. And one can't fix the other. You can't be like, well, if I just catch up on all my emails, I'll work a Saturday, I'll catch up on all my emails, and then I'll be good, right? And then then I'll deal with the stuff. Something's always going to happen. And so what we find is those two different stressors attack you at the same time. And you never,
Right.
and then as you start to just succumb to that exhaustion, that's when compassion fatigue kicks in. And we always say that you're the last one to know you have it because it changes your worldview. So that story you told about the client who's the same age as your daughter, same similar background, place growing up, it hit you harder because you didn't have that bandwidth and your worldview changes, right? And says, well, if that could happen to this girl, it could happen to my daughter. And I've had similar situations where, and I could think of one off the top of my head. I had a case where a young kid that was the same age as my son got burned on water because the valve or the water heater in the basement of the apartment complex didn't go from like lukewarm to really hot. It just started really hot. So
Mm.
the kid had his hands in, second, third degree burns on his hands. But I had the
Wow.
same reaction. If that can happen to this kid, it could happen to my kid, and it changes your perception. And so it's interesting that we have these two different sides coming at us every day. And so when we say trauma informed, that word informed is really the key word. And what I mean by that is just understanding that, right? Just understanding those things I just said, that when you're driving into work, and you're going to have stressful, emotional subject matter, and you're probably going to have something in the office that's also going to be taking your time. Just being aware of that and going, okay, how do I sort my day out that I can control what energy I'm spending where more? And just doing that, I know it sounds super simple, but I think I started doing that. I would say every time I get on the phone with a client, I'm going to go over what we've done in the past, what we're doing currently, what I'm on the phone with them about, and then kind of a blueprint of what's happening moving forward. And every time I talk to someone, that's what we're going to do. And just preparing myself mentally for every call, knowing that I've got a plan and how they react is going to be different every time you talk to a different client. But I
Right.
know in my head, this is the way I want this conversation to go. Like that little thing and making that part of my daily routine with every client I talk to gives me more energy because it's never I don't know what I'm going to be doing on this phone call. I got a plan. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that does. I think awareness is key, and being proactive versus reactive. Those are two things that we always talk about on the podcast in
Yes.
general, whatever topic we talk about, right? We tend to be more reactive as a law firm, right? We're
Yep.
reacting to everything. We're setting out fires. We're doing all the things when there's a lot of things we can put into place, which is why I ended up doing ultimately what Eda Rosa LLC does, right? We create a
Hmm.
more reactive, I'm sorry, a more proactive process, and
Yeah.
we and proactive training and making sure that if somebody's out sick, it's okay. Somebody else can come in and do just as well. And so understanding that, cross training and putting tools into place and processes and all these things is available, right? It's available to every single law firm, regardless if you're a sole practitioner, a big law, it doesn't matter, right? When you put these little plans into place, it'll be better, right? You'll be more, I guess, equipped to handle
Mhm.
anything that comes your way, right? Because you already have all these tools lined up. I call it like ready for war. You have all your weapons, you have all your armor, all the things, right? I know it sounds aggressive, but I guess it's
No,
probably the best way I can say it.
it's a great
Because
way.
we get
That's great.
passionate about our clients, right? We
Yes.
care. That's why we get compassion fatigue. That's
Hmm.
why we get secondary trauma. That's why we get burnout and anxious. And I was speaking to some colleagues the other day that are still in the field, and she was getting ready to go to trial with her attorneys, and she's a long-term paralegal. She was actually one of my mentors when I was doing litigating. And somebody that I looked up to very much till this day. She's just an amazing paralegal litigator. And, she was getting ready for court. So she was up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning texting me and powwowing some goals and making sure that she got everything and she got that defense verdict, right? And so the
Hmm.
other day she was messaging me and she's like, "We got the verdict." And I'm like, "Great, but can you get some sleep now?"
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's, we get into it, right? Or we're so passionate. That's why we do it. Because we care. We care about our clients. And
Hmm.
so that kind of is a double-edged sword, right? We need to, another thing that I always tell my audience is set time for yourself, right? Like
Hmm.
we give, right? But you can't give out of an empty cup. So
Yeah.
having these like moments where you can just like, I remember when I would get that call from that one client that I knew it was going to be just really tough, whether it was verbal, whether it was, whatever, chaotic. I would take deep breaths before I would
Yeah.
answer the phone, right? And I would not answer it, but I would just be like, okay, let me prepare myself. I know this person is in this place and I have to understand that. And like just reminding, right? Awareness, right? So I would just take deep breaths and I'd just be like, okay, here we go. We're going in, you know?
Yep.
But it's like you have to, right? At the end of the day, they're human, they're going through some things, like you said. And so we have to be more proactive. And I think being more proactive and being aware and setting these things into place will better, I guess, improve our efficiency, our effectiveness, but are humanizing the legal industry. At the end of the day, we've lost that. Everything is so automated and streamlined, and now AI is, responding to our clients. And okay, that's great. But like at the end of the day, they're still going to want some human interaction, right? Like we can't
100%.
ignore them for life. So
It's interesting you talk
balance.
about that one client that you're like, I'm about to get on the phone. I'm going to take some deep breaths and prepare myself. So one of the things that we're really interested in right now is the traumatized client, right? So remember we talked about secondary trauma as a profession, but they're the ones that underwent primary trauma.
Right.
And so trauma symptoms are about control, right? They've experienced something that they cannot control. They didn't control doing it. Now they're in a lawyer's office where they can't control that because the lawyer's office has a way of doing it. And depending on how hands-on and trauma-informed the law firm is, it could feel very sterile, right? Like, well, just trust us, we know what we're doing. So trauma
Yeah.
symptoms are about control, hypervigilance, easily startle, right? Like a high startle response. Um, just needing to control the conversation. And then when you get triggered from a trauma perspective, your frontal cortex, which is where your memory is, goes offline, right? And so
Right.
forgetting what was talked about in conversations. And so when attorneys will go, well, that's a difficult client, quote unquote, right? Oh boy, you're going to talk to Susie Q. Oh boy,
No.
she's difficult. If you change that viewpoint and say she's it is difficult interacting with her, but she's traumatized. And then look at the symptoms of primary trauma and go, yep, she's got that. Every time I talk to her, she gets upset if I say one thing that isn't exactly what she needs to hear. She calls 4 times a day. She says she's never talked to anyone, even though we all have notes that say that we talked to her. Those are all like perfect examples of trauma. And so if you can go, okay, let's take away the word difficult. She's not a difficult client. She's undergoing and working through symptoms of trauma. it will change how you view your conversations with her, right? And that's why I said every time I get on the phone with somebody, we're going to talk about what we have done so far, why we're on the phone right now, and then a somewhat as best I can explanation of what the future is going to look like based on the decisions we're making today. That is
Mm,
such an easy way for somebody to go from redlined trauma to back to baseline and have an actual conversation with you. And maybe they don't remember what you talked about because they're so worked
right.
up. But guess what? Next time you talk to them on the phone, you're going to talk about what you did. You're going to talk about what you're going to do and then, or what you're doing, and then what the future looks like. And every time you're going to repeat that with them, that builds such a level of trust in even the most traumatized or quote unquote difficult clients because they know I'm going to get I'm going to get some background and I'm going to get what we're here for and then I'll know a little bit about what it's going to look like. That's like changing your viewpoint from, and that goes for depositions and it goes for trial prep, intake calls, right? Intake is a hard job
Don't get me
because
started with intake.
every time you get on the phone, that person is trying to convey to you why their situation is important enough for you to take it. And so you're going to get hit with as much information in unfiltered ways as you possibly can, and you got to do it over and over and over and over. And you can start to get burnt out with that and say like, okay, I don't know if I have the bandwidth for another one of these right now. And to just say, look, this person that's calling is calling because they don't want to. They're calling because something happened to them. They probably got at least one symptom of trauma. Let's change how we're viewing that. And yeah, maybe they're difficult. Maybe they are super hyper vigilant. And what have you done? And it feels like, hey, I'm on your side here, right? Like I did
Right.
workers' comp. And workers' comp, I'm a plaintiff lawyer, so it felt as though they could deny for no reason. And then it was like, well, we have to set a hearing. Well, I need my wages paid. Well, they denied it, and so we have to go to hearing, and the hearing isn't for 6 weeks. What am I supposed to do in the short term, right?
Right.
That's that's a hypervigilance. That's trying to control something that they can't control, right? And so I've had literally people say like, "Well, Christmas is in 3 weeks. How do you think I should pay for my gifts for my children?" If you get that over and over again enough, it's gonna start to beat you down, right? And burn you out. And so you got to change your mindset and say, look, remember why they're here. Remember why you're here. It will, I don't want to sound like a guru, but if you do that, it will change and make your days better.
I hope you're enjoying this podcast episode so far, as this podcast is just the beginning. At Eda Rosa LLC, we specialize in helping law firms and legal teams thrive with tailored staff training, operations management, and team building solutions. Whether you're looking to streamline your practice or elevate your team's potential, we're here to help. So visit www.edarosallc.com. That's www.edarosallc.com. Absolutely. I did that. We do that a lot when you practice yoga and things like that. We do a
Yeah.
lot of breath work, meditation, clear your mind. And there's this one exercise. I guess we can get into the tips and tricks, and I'll start
Yeah.
with the tips and tricks part. But there's this one exercise that I know it sounds like mundane and like excruciating nails on the chalkboard, but it helps so much when you are trying to fight your trauma, right? Whatever your trauma is, because at the end of the day, we have our own
We
traumas,
all have it.
whether
Yep.
it's through childhood, whether it's through grief, whether it's through loss, whatever, whatever it is. And then, the little, like the little things add up, right? So it's like, and if you're not aware of that, that's also going to create, suppressed trauma. So
Mhm.
anyways, having said that, you'll find out all of that that's happening without the hypnosis, without going to therapists. You can do this for free. You just need about 30. I would start with at least 30 minutes, and then I think I've lasted, the longest I've lasted is an hour. And you literally just sit in front of a blank wall. So you just
Mhm.
sit in front of a blank wall, no distractions. If you want, just put your headphones on so you can't hear anything, but don't put music, don't do anything. It's just to silence yourself and literally isolate yourself for like an hour. And you'll realize how many things are going through your head, how many thoughts you're spitting out, how many stories you're creating, right? Because a lot of times we get mad at someone when they didn't really do any of the things that we're thinking that they did. Or we get stressed out for something that hasn't happened yet. or
Mhm.
we're trying to, again, control, right? It's all about controlling the outcome, controlling the results in anything that we do in life, especially if you're a parent or a caregiver or a guardian or anything.
Mhm.
You want to control everything and you can't.
Mhm.
So literally all the stories that come into your head, and then at one point I couldn't remember all of them, but you just let your thoughts just exhaust you, right? They just get
Mhm.
exhausted after a while, and finally your brain goes silent. And it's the most relieving non-chemical thing that you
Mhm.
can do, right? Because that's another thing, that another, I guess, trauma that we have, or a lot that happens in our industry is drug abuse or alcohol
Mhm.
abuse, right? So because of that, because we're suppressing it, we're trying to dumb it, we're trying to numb it, whatever it is. And
Yep.
so this is like an easy exercise that you guys, I know it's not easy, it's going to be very, very vigorous, but
Mhm.
it's like the most simplest thing you can do is just sit there, stare at this blank wall, and trust me, it works. I've done it about, I want to say 3 times when I've been under like, okay, I need to like shut my brain out and
Mhm.
meditation's not working. And so I'll sit there and I'll just look doing nothing. And it has worked every time. Every time I get out of it, I'm just like, oh, I feel so much better. This is amazing. I didn't have to pay
Yeah.
$150 or $200 to talk to my therapist. I just did it on my own. And another thing that we don't know, and because you talked about organizational, what was it? Stressors? Or
Organizational stress, yeah.
yeah, another thing that we can't control is other people and how they react and how they're going to do things, right? So
Mhm.
one thing that I learned in those situations is you can't control other people. So the only thing you can control is yourself. And
Mhm.
you're not going to please everybody, and not everybody's going to like you, and you're just going to, it's going to have to be okay at that point. And for me, that was hard because I was always a people pleaser. I was a perfectionist. I always got the kudos from the boss. And then my colleagues were just not having that, right? Some of them reacted a certain way about that. But then I
Mhm.
realized that it had nothing to do with me, it had everything to do with them. But again, that's the trauma response, right? That is the suppressed trauma. That is whatever childhood trauma, whatever it is. They could be going through things, grief, loss. They're human too, right? We all have lives outside the office. So understand that, right? Be empathetic, be compassionate to everyone,
Well,
because that's just supposed to
the
be.
organizational stress is a spiral, and if it's because everyone within the office plays off of each other. And
Mm,
so, one example I like to give is, let's say an attorney's got an extremely stressful deposition going on or coming up that afternoon, and so they're focused on it. They're focused on it. All their energy's going into it. They go into it. It's really draining, and they come out and they've got 5 voicemails, and one of them's from a difficult, or as I like to say, a traumatized client that they know I just can't call them back today. I don't have it in me to do it. And so they
mm,
don't. And then what happens? That client calls the staff, calls the paralegal and says, I left a voicemail and the attorney didn't call me back. And then guess
mm,
what? You get the brunt of that. And so then you go to the attorney and you say, hey, you got to call him back. It's like, I'm not calling him back today. I can't do it. And then maybe another deposition tomorrow. And all of a sudden that starts snowballing. Now that client's mad. And every time you have to pick the phone up because the attorney doesn't have time or the bandwidth to do it. So you get what? You get resentful of the attorney. You go, why aren't they
mm,
doing their job? All this is doing is affecting mine. And that slow roll is organizational stress, right? Or organizational trauma. And it's because everybody's got the operational stuff and then it begets the organizational stuff where all of a sudden now it's like you're not doing your job, or maybe you lose a paralegal to a new job or something and everyone has to pick up the slack. And so yeah, I mean we go through all of the organizational symptoms and everyone just goes, "Oh yeah, we got that. Oh yeah, we have that."
mm.
Infighting, secrets, all the stuff that happens. And so I think what you said is a good point. You cannot worry about everyone else. You just got to do what your job is because everybody's going through it. And the attorneys need to be a little more aware. And when we talk to lawyers, your staff is your front line. And that every time you don't return a voicemail, they're the ones that have to try to explain to that client why you didn't. So it
Mhm.
is an interesting ecosystem that we in the legal world live in because we're so dependent on each other, but we have to treat each other, you know, well also to avoid that as best as possible, the organizational stress.
And I want to end this conversation with an example, and it's pretty actually dead on right now, which is really weird how the universe, God, whatever works. This morning I was reading a post from the last employer I ever had, which was an amazing attorney, but definitely had his trauma, definitely had his things. And I know that now.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Like this is something that I can, see in retrospect.
sure.
But when I was living in it, it wasn't great. It was a really bad environment. And I was going through it. I had recently lost my father and birthed a child all in 1 year. And
Mm,
so really going through those, unspoken traumas and
yeah,
not getting help or, navigating through that in any way was not helping me having a boss that wasn't understanding, that wasn't compassionate, or even
right.
understanding what was going on with me, why I wasn't top notch, or why I wasn't giving it my best, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
Um, and then ultimately we ended up just, he didn't even fire me. I didn't even quit. It was just like a thing where I just like gave my badge and walked out. Like it was
yeah.
that like kind of situation.
Mm,
And then that's when I started like what I call my healing journey, right? And so I want to let you guys know that the reason why I have this business and the reason why is exactly what we're talking about right now. It's about this trauma response. It's about secondary, it's about compassionate fatigue. And I didn't want to leave the legal system, right? I didn't want to leave the legal industry because I knew that I wasn't the only one going through this. I knew that there was other solutions out there and other people that felt the same way that were looking at what I was looking at. And it took a long time for me to get out of whatever funk I was in, but
mm,
I did, right? And it was possible. And I kept going and I built what now is Eda Rosa LLC because of it, because I knew that I wasn't the only one, that there's other, really good litigating paralegals or support staff or whatever it is that your little heart desires. And the answer is not to walk away. The
right.
answer is if you really care about our communities, if you really care about the legal industry and you really love your job, it's going to come at a cost, but it doesn't have to be paid, right? It just has to be actually credited and just put in and saved and really grow that. Because what happens is that there's so many other ways that we can provide legal assistance. The paralegal role is growing anyway. So there's other ways you can do it. There's other law firms you can work for if they're not listening or they're not willing to provide you with the tools or education or have a consulting firm come in or
Mm,
Pat come in and, train you guys or whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, that is a they problem, right? You can't control that. So unfortunately, but you can again control what you can do. So you can get out of
mhm.
it, you can go to a better environment, or you can change the narrative, which is what this podcast is all about. So thank you so much, Pat. I appreciate your
Absolutely.
time. This was
Absolutely.
amazing. I feel like I could talk to you like forever because we have so much, synergy there. And I love it. And I appreciate everything that you're doing, especially as a lawyer. I feel that has more power. And I know this is something that I kind of fail at because I'm not a lawyer and here I am consulting for law firms. So a lot of people look at me like, who are you? But yeah, I've proven it, right? 7 years strong. So I have
You've
proven
been
that
in the
there is a
trenches.
solution.
You've been in the trenches. You understand it. And
Yeah,
I started my career as a pre-suit paralegal, and it was the best experience of any of my experiences because I've seen both sides of the firm. So no, I would not discount that at all. I think being in the trenches is being in the trenches, whether you're an attorney or a paralegal. Everyone is going through it, and everyone's got the goal of best interest of the client in mind. And we have, like you said, our effects and becoming informed of it and what causes it, and then what it looks like will change how you go about your day. So I've had a great time. I
absolutely.
think it's awesome what you're doing. Keep doing it,
Thank
and
you.
love to do this again sometime and keep talking.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. That's it for today, guys. Until justice is served. Bye, guys.